Hello everyone, thanks for stopping by and checking out my channel. Now for today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys one of my favorite builds in Diablo 4 for the Druid class. Now as of recording this video, my Druid is level 43 and I've been using this build since the early 20s. And it has been making my life just way easier. I've redone all my skills, and I've tried a number of different builds so far. I've tried using werewolves and poison. I've tried using the werebear and just trying to make a tank. But so far, the build I'm showing you guys in today's video has gotten me the best results. Now, I'm calling this the Thor build because it's going to be using a lot of elemental effects and elemental abilities. We're going to be using a lot of lightning and storm attacks. We're not going to be really using much of the werebear and the werewolf. And the whole purpose of this build is to get all of the abilities to stack on top of each other, making all of the enemies around you vulnerable, thus making them take more damage. And we're going to be doing a ton of constant DPS to the enemies. Now, I'm not going to claim that this is like the best build in the game or anything. This is just a really fun build that I've been using for quite some time now. It's gotten me through a lot of tough spots. Like I said, I'm still only in my 40s. Once I get into the late game content and I get a couple more skill points, that's when I'm going to see the true potential of this build. But if you guys are looking for an early game Druid build to help carry you through your playthrough, I don't think this build is going to let you down. Alright, so getting into the skill tree, the first abilities I went with Storm Strike for the basic. I ranked it up all the way to 5 because you gain 25% damage reduction for 3 seconds after dealing damage with Storm Strike. So anytime I hit an enemy with this, I'm going to get 25% damage reduction. That's a pretty big deal. And then for the modifiers, obviously you have to go with the middle one here. This one gives you a 15% chance to immobilize all enemies for 2.6 seconds. And then I went with this option where Storm Strike has a 50% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. So every time I hit an enemy with my basic, there's a 50% chance that they're going to take 20% increased damage. So the 20% increased vulnerability that we're going to be giving the enemies is going to work really well with some of our other abilities. So down to the second tree, I went with the Lightning Storm. This is going to be the bread and butter of your build. This is the ability that you're going to just be spamming constantly. It does a ton of damage. So I made sure to upgrade this to 5 as soon as possible because when it's level 5, it just deals a crap ton of damage. You conjure a Lightning Storm that deals 327 damage per strike. The number of strikes increases the longer the storm is channeled, up to a maximum of 5 at once. And then for the 2 modifiers, the size of your Lightning Storm is preserved for 4 seconds after channeling. And then I went with this one. Lightning Storm has a 8% chance to immobilize enemies for 3.12 seconds. So I just decided to go with immobilizing enemies over the additional Lightning Strike. So that's everything for the second tree. Then for the defensive skills, I went with 2 different defensive skills. The first one, I went with Cyclone Armor. Its passive ability is Powerful Winds Surround You, granting 13.7% non-physical damage reduction. And the active ability is the Winds Rapidly Expand, knocking back enemies, dealing 301 damage. And then the 2 modifiers are enemies who are knocked back by Cyclone Armor are slowed by 70% for 2 seconds. So it pushes the enemies back away from me and then slows them down. That buys me just enough time to maybe pop off a heal or run away and get out of a tricky situation. And then we have the Preserving Cyclone Armor. Every 10 seconds, Cyclone Armor intensifies, causing incoming damage to grant you 30% damage reduction for 2 seconds. So any damage reduction I can get, I'm going to take, because with this build, you're kind of like a glass cannon. You're going to deal out a lot of damage, but it is going to be difficult for you to take hits. So any damage reduction I can get, I'm going to take. Now, when I get some extra points, I do want to put some points into these defensive skills. These ones increase your non-physical resistances, so this will protect you from like magic and stuff. And then I want to put points into this one. You gain 5% damage reduction for 6 seconds after using a defensive skill. You can buff that up a couple of times. So anytime I pop off the Cyclone Armor, I will get an extra damage reduction on top of that. But then I've also been putting some points into the Bloodhowl ability. This will transform you into a werewolf. As soon as I get a couple more skill points, I'm going to bump this up to 5. Now this is actually one of my favorite skills in the game for the Druid because this skill basically acts as a second potion. It has a cooldown of 14 seconds and you shapeshift into a werewolf and howl furiously, healing you for 21.8% of your maximum life, and then you can upgrade this a couple of different times. So here, just put another point into it. Then the next rank is going to be 25% life. Then for the modifiers, kills reduce the cooldown of Bloodhowl by 1 second. So every time you get a kill, you're going to be that much closer to using it again. And then the second ability, I went with Blood Howl also generates 20 spirit, because you're going to be spamming the lightning ability as much as possible, and you're going to need as much spirit as possible. So every time you use this Blood Howl, you're going to get your life back and your spirit back. Then down here for the companion tree, I actually decided not to go with a companion, believe it or not, mainly because I've been playing with my friends and they've been taking a lot of the aggro and I've kind of been sitting in the back and using lightning. So if I'm playing solo, I like to go with maybe the Ravens and, go with the like Thor / Odin vibe. And if I'm going to go with the Ravens, I like to go with the Ferocious Ravens because they also will make enemies vulnerable. But for this build, I skipped over the companion tree completely because I went down here to the Wrath skills and I put most of my points into these Wrath skills. So first up, let's talk about this ability, the Hurricane. You form a hurricane around you that deals 699 damage to the surrounding enemies over 9 seconds. And then as you upgrade it, it's going to do even more damage to enemies. Right now, I only have it at level 1. Then for the modifiers, Enhanced Hurricane, enemies who are damaged by Hurricane are slowed by 25% for 2 seconds. And then the Savage Hurricane, enemies affected by Hurricane deal 20% less damage. So this is going to help a little bit at reducing the damage that I take from the enemies. Then for these skills, I keep putting points into these skills because what these do is basically just buff my lightning attacks. For the first perk here, we have Lucky Hit. Your storm skills have up to a 10% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. So I put 3 points into that because the more chance I have at making enemies vulnerable, the better. Then the second perk here increases the duration of Hurricane and Cataclysm by 10%. And then if I upgrade it again, it's going to make it 15%. So that just makes this ability last even longer. So that's a huge plus. Then we have this one, Bad Omen, a Lucky Hit, up to a 20% chance when dealing damage to a vulnerable, immobilized, or stun enemy that a lightning bolt also hits, dealing 401 damage. And then if I upgrade it again, it's going to make it 30%. And since this whole build is based around doing things to make enemies vulnerable, this is a great skill to do additional damage to vulnerable enemies. Then we have Electric Shock. Dealing lightning damage to enemies has up to a 10% chance to immobilize them for 3 seconds. If the target is already immobilized, the lightning damage dealt to them is increased by 10% instead. And then if I upgrade it again, both of those go up to 15%. Then Charged Atmosphere, every 15 seconds, a lightning bolt hits a nearby enemy, dealing 328 damage. And then if I upgrade it again, it's every 12 seconds. And what's cool about this Charged Atmosphere ability is that while I'm walking around in the environment, the lightning bolts will lock on to just random objects. So if there's just something in the environment that can be destroyed, this lightning bolt will just automatically attack those things and then reveal some different loot for me. So there's a lot of times when I'm exploring in a dungeon and there's like a rock or something that I would have just normally just passed by. This lightning bolt will shock the rock and reveal an item for me that I normally just would have completely missed. So this Charged Atmosphere is a great ability when it comes to just running around and exploring in the environment. Not to mention that it also deals damage in combat, obviously. So down here for the ultimate, I obviously went with Cataclysm, and then I put both of the upgrade points into Cataclysm. The cooldown is close to a minute long. A massive storm follows you for 13.75 seconds. Twisters knock back enemies, and lightning strikes wildly, dealing 380 damage. For the modifiers, this one just adds 2 seconds to the ability, and then this one adds lightning strikes from Cataclysm, makes enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. So this is yet another ability that will make enemies vulnerable, and then all those enemies are going to be taking just tons of DPS from the storm. And then for the final tree, I went with Perfect Storm. Storm skills that you cast grant 1 spirit and deal 15% increased damage when damaging a vulnerable, immobilized, or slowed enemy. And since this whole build is based on making enemies vulnerable, this 15% increased damage to vulnerable enemies just makes a huge difference and will just absolutely melt through certain enemies. But obviously this build isn't complete. There's still a couple things I want to play around with. For example, I want to play around with this skill tree over in the ultimate skills. I want to put some points into Defiance, which improves your nature magic skills. Then we have this one, your storm skills deal 4% increased damage to enemies that are stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. So there's a couple abilities in this tree that I want to upgrade to make it just even better. And then I want to go back and finish upgrading these skills just to make my lightning attacks even stronger. And then if you want to get the absolute most out of your build, one of the very first things you should try to do is unlock your class-specific quest. And once you complete the class-specific quest for the Druid, you unlock the access to Spirit Boons. if you go to your map and check your journal on the 3rd tab, you're going to have your individual class missions. It's definitely a little bit harder to get your class-specific ability for the Druid compared to some of the other classes, but once you get your Spirit Boons upgraded, there's a number of different abilities you can have activated that are really good for this build as well. For the first boon, I went with gain 10% maximum Spirit. Because with this build, you're going to be spamming the absolute crap out of your Lightning Storm ability, so the 10 maximum Spirit helps out with that. For the second boon, I went with the gain 30% critical strike damage, because anytime you pop off a critical, that extra 30% damage is going to make a bit of a difference. For the third boon, I went with extend the duration of your ultimate skills by 25%. That is going to increase the duration of the Cataclysm Storm, and the longer that ability is active, the more AoE is going off, the more damage over time, and the more enemies are going to become vulnerable. So I definitely want that extra 25% on my ultimate skill. This extra 25% on my ultimate just makes a huge difference, so I highly recommend you activate this boon. Then for the final boons, I went ahead and upgraded my Spirit Bonding, and I selected the Snake. That way I could have 2 boons activated for the final tree. For the first one, I picked Overload. Dealing lightning damage has up to a 20% chance to cause the target to emit a static discharge, dealing 143 lightning damage to surrounding enemies. And since the majority of our attacks are going to be lightning attacks, this is going to proc pretty often. And then I went with Calm Before the Storm. Lucky Hit. Nature magic skills have up to a 15% chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate by 2 seconds. And the faster we can get our ultimate off and the more often, obviously, the better. So that is the Thor build that I've used for my Druid character. Like I said, this build has carried me through most of my playthrough. This is a good build to use solo on your own, but it definitely works better when you're playing with friends, especially if you're playing with a friend that likes to play as a tank and they like to draw all the aggro. You can just sit back and just cast all your lightning just over and over and over, doing tons of damage, making all of the enemies vulnerable. And once an enemy becomes vulnerable, they're vulnerable to your entire squad. So that is going to do it for the Thor build guide for the Druid class. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section down below. Let me know what class you guys are playing in Diablo 4. I plan on making a ton of build guides for all of the different characters. So if you don't want to miss out on any future Diablo 4 videos, then be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications. And that is going to do it for me, guys, and I will talk to you all in the next video.